Greetings and various assorted salutations. Welcome to the first content lecture for U.S. History 3 on World War II. It's about topic 14 in your textbook, which is for fall 2020. Much of this lecture will cover parts of 14.4 in particular. However, this also pulls on my own learnings on the topic and some knowledge from my colleagues. To aid you, the students, some parts of this lecture will also be kind of as an aside to teach you how lectures work and how you, the student, should approach them. This first part will start up when we begin this course. So think of this lecture as kind of a bit of a dramatic introduction. So, now, when are we? We are currently in the 1930s, starting out. It's the height of the Great Depression. Dust storms blot out the sun in the Great Plains. The stock market has crashed. The banks have failed. Unemployment strikes 1 in 4 Americans. Hunger and homelessness became norms for many Americans in the 1930s. As you can see, there's more evidence of this here. Here's a picture of a dust bowl, of a dust storm. Now, the 20th century so far has not been kind to this world. The Great War ravaged Europe. A generation of young men lost the horrors of industrial war. Millions died in the trenches. Crippled psychologically with shell shock or physically maimed, many veterans make up the destitute and homeless in every European city. There's a reason why plastic surgery and prosthetics dramatically improve in this era. There are plenty of patients to work with. And these are just some pictures to kind of show you what people thought of the Great War afterwards. It's a great and terrible industrial war. Here's some pictures of early plastic surgery and World War I injury work. Additionally, there was the Spanish flu, of course, killing more on the battlefields than the entire war, and it struck children and youths particularly. Here's some pictures of it. It was a global pandemic. But additionally, many economies were in shambles. France, the British Empire, Germany is left with the debt of the Great War. Essentially, there's a lot of things that make the economies of the world weak. In particular, Germany, being left with the debt of the Great War, this was due to the Treaty of Versailles. This document ended World War I, and it stated that Germans owed reparations, which was a bill for every bullet fired at them and by them. Incidentally, they couldn't pay off this entire bill. They wouldn't finish paying it off until 2010, in our lifetime. But, of course, this speaks nothing of the revolutions in Russia and China and their own struggles, but we will talk about them later on in this course. I suppose the other thing that's worth mentioning is democracies of the 20th century. They were challenged by all these problems, and they were failing in many cases. Weimar Germany, one of the freest nations in the world, was one of the first to give women the right to vote. It was crumbling. Communists and fascists openly clashed violently on the streets. France's Third Republic is polarized and unable to build unity. And America's freedom seemed to include the consequences of economic failure. And many people around the globe are beginning to ask, is freedom necessary? If governments chosen by the people cannot address the people's struggles and guarantee security, what's the point? And this is a concept that's going to come up quite a bit, especially during this interwar years, into World War II, and afterwards. For now, though, let's dive into our objectives. Now, these learning objectives are pulled from your textbook, and they kind of frame the whole unit that we're looking at. So this may go a bit beyond all the stuff I'm covering today in this short lecture. Some of these will roll into other ones. So just to go through them real quick, explain the rise of dictatorships in the Soviet Union, Italy, Germany, and Japan in the 1930s. Summarize acts of aggression by Italy, Germany, and Japan. Analyze responses of Britain, France, and the United States to aggressive regimes. And apparently I posted that in there twice. Oh well, typos. We're particularly going to focus on Germany today, if in case you didn't get that from the title of this lecture. But Now, next here are some vocab terms. A lot of these are pulled from the textbook, and I do recommend you can either pause the video now or you can go over these terms later. But these terms are some of the terms that are covered in this unit. You may notice that these vocab terms do not line up with your vocab assignments, notebook, or study guide, or whatever type of assignment I'm giving you have for this unit or this lecture. And that's because history has a lot of content, and we can only focus on so much at a time. And we only need to focus on so much in order to cover this course. After all, the goal is to give you a background, foundational knowledge of American history in the modern era. And so these terms here, some of them will match up, some of them will not, but they will help you better understand what we're going through over the next few units. But do know that we don't test over everything, and that's good because that's a lot of ground to cover. But what you need to study over will be covered in class and explained further. Anyways, let's dive into the lecture. Our first little topic is on peace dissolving. Now, in this section, I'll be talking about the collapse of the peace that came about through the Treaty of Versailles and the end of the Great War. Now, you may notice there are some blocks of text that I don't necessarily read, and that's because I figure you can pause the video, you can read through them yourself, and they're just helpful summaries of some of the more complicated topics covered in this lecture, or maybe explaining the picture that's in there. You can access this slideshow at the bottom in the description of this video. Additionally, I'm going to include my lecture for this script so that you can consult it as well. But to kind of get into things, we were talking about it before, but democratically elected governments were not able to fix the damages caused by World War I or the Great Depression in ways that satisfied their peoples. In places like France, Germany, and the United States, political divisions bogged down any major or fast responses. While these slower, more negotiated responses are great for ensuring that all people's interests can be heard, many were frustrated that good ideas could be effectively negated by bureaucracy, the political swamp of squabbling factions, things like that. If we were to take one of these countries, for example, in the 1930s, America was divided between Democrats and Republicans on how to respond to the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the stock market crash. Now, some new governments would arise in this era, and they came in a totalitarian style of government. We'll talk about that in a second. And totalitarianism is a form of government, and it can come in several, let's go with flavors for arrangement. First, to talk a little about Russia very briefly. Russia, renamed the Soviet Union, would organize a communist government. It came out of World War I. The Communist Party basically argued that unified people needed to guide the state, and that was what needed to be done. Essentially, according to them, the Great Depression was the result of greedy capitalists. We'll talk about capitalism and whatnot in the next unit on the Cold War. But also, World War I, according to the Soviets, was just a slaughter in the name of imperialist lusts for land and resources at the cost of the working class. Essentially what they were saying, the Soviets were saying, is the common man was suffering because everyone was trying to get more stuff or get more land or fight for glory, and it was the workers who were dying in the names of other people's greed. That's what they're saying here. But we will talk more about Russia and the Soviet Union in the Cold War unit. But moving on, here's Joseph Stalin. Moving on, we're going to talk about fascism. This is another type of government that would arise in Italy and later be copied in Germany. Essentially, Benito Mussolini, he was the dictator that would arise in Italy, would argue that the people needed unity over freedom. Instead of debate, these people needed a single proud nation marching forward. He wanted to recreate the Roman Empire as kind of one of his running themes. And this is something that is called fascism. Fascism and communism are two types of totalitarian governments. Totalitarianism is the idea that the government takes control of every aspect of life, how the people live, the entertainment they have access to, jobs, education, information, etc. And every aspect of the citizen is to be managed in the totalitarian state. And this power is over the citizen is held by the government in the name of advancing the nation and guaranteeing security. Now, to talk about fascism in particular, fascism is perhaps best explained through how it got its name. And this is the symbol that is often used to describe fascism. This is a bundle of sticks attached to an axe. It's an old Roman imperial symbol of power and authority. And the idea behind it is individually, any one stick can snap or break, but when they're bundled together, they form a strong bond capable of cutting through any mess. And the idea behind fascism and the sticks represent the people and government institutions, while the rope around them represents the leader who unites the nation and guides it into glory. One man with power embodies the will of a nation. And that is the idea behind fascism. So in Italy, that would have been Benito Mussolini. In Germany, that would be Adolf Hitler. And this kind of leads to our next topic of talking about Germany. And essentially what happens is one of the reasons why fascism is successful in 20th century Europe, why it succeeds in Italy, it succeeds in a few other places, notably Germany, is fascism cuts through one of the great weaknesses of democracy, or challenges of democracy, depending on how you want to look at it. And perhaps the best way to explain this is something I got from a book titled The Ninth Wave by Eugene Burdick. And in this fictional work, one of the main characters realizes that one person can make a decision faster than a group. One of the core principles behind democracy is this idea of debate and a decision process, whereas fascism essentially says that these big decisions can be made by a small core of people, and in crisis, people want action over debate. And even if the action only feels good, it's been shown that's what people want, is some sort of action that feels like it's moving in the right direction. But for fascism in Germany, it's going to be through Adolf Hitler, who became the leader of the Nazi Party, and he would kind of represent this binding force for the Nazi vision of what Germany would be. Hitler was called the Führer, which is German meaning leader. I apologize for pronunciations. I'm not always the best at them. Anyways, he not only served as the Nazi party of the leader of the Nazi Party, but he also represented the determined will for Germany to form an empire. The Nazis referred to Germany as the Germany that they ran as the Third Reich, and it was an attempt to connect Germany to the Nazi Germany to previous versions of Germany. But to really understand how that happens, we may need to take some time and talk about Weimar. And so Weimar is going to be our kind of an example of a story of how democracy can die. And its consequences we're going to see are something called World War II. But to give you a bit of background information, the Weimar Republic is named for the city of Weimar in Thuringia. Incidentally, it's near our sister city, Apolda. And it was the government built to be the free and democratic government of Germany after World War I. The reason it was founded in Weimar is because Weimar was politically more stable than Berlin, the capital that had been of Germany. Now, in the Weimar Republic, women could vote. Freedom of press was essential. There was an emphasis on capitalism and a growing consumer economy. And people were not bound by social class. However, if you're reading the slide here, you may notice that they had a lot of problems to deal with, and they had a lot of problems that they were just not able to overcome in the grand scheme of things. They had debt to the United States, Britain, and France. They also owed the United States money because they borrowed money from the U.S. to pay war reparations to U.S., British, and French. Yeah, a bit confusing. Additionally, they had a problem with hyperinflation. What is hyperinflation? It's where the cost of living just kept going up and up and up, and the value of money kept going down and down and down. That is a very simple explanation for a complex idea. But here you can see the stacks of money. This was better used as toys than actual real money for many Germans. But to give you an example how bad the economy was, there's a story of a German man who was paid his wages, and he carried it in a wheelbarrow. And he brought it home, and while he was eating lunch, he realized he'd left his wheelbarrow full of money out in front of his house. When he rushed out to go see it, the money was still there. It was stacked neatly on the sidewalk, and the wheelbarrow was stolen because it was worth more. The entire wheelbarrow full of money, at most, that money could have bought him a single loaf of bread. Of course, this economy in shambles means that a lot of people are unemployed and in poverty. It's a dark time. No German political group could really fix this. There were conservatives who were lost in the memory of the old German monarchy. The Social Democrats couldn't organize a large enough group to encourage a democratic approach. Most people didn't trust the communists. The communists didn't trust democracy. And many politicians would find themselves voted in and voted out of office in a rapid cycle. And then a small party came about. And this is the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. And it started to gain some popularity in some areas. They are noted for their hatred of the communists and the Jews. They blamed the modernizing democracy for the decline of German society. And they hated the fact that Germany lost World War I, and they frequently blamed Jews for the whole mess. Additionally, the Nazis had a fondness for violence. They formed a group called the SA, and they often wore brown shirts, and they were known for their capacity to commit violence. They beat up Jews. They brawled with communists, and they even tried to overthrow the Bavarian state government at one point. During this last incident, called the Beer Hall Putsch, a young Austrian, failed artist, and World War I veteran distinguished himself. Adolf Hitler developed a flair for giving speeches, and when he was in prison, he would go on to write a book called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. There's a picture of the book. I think it's a reprint. And essentially, in Mein Kampf, Hitler outlined his vision of Germany. Germany would be a world power made up of people, referred to as Aryans, that were considered racially superior to other human beings. Further, the reason why Germany hadn't achieved this goal, even though the Nazis considered themselves the master race, they believed that the German state had been held back by poor leadership, cowardice, and Jewish conspiracy. Hitler's Germany, however, he claimed would stand up to communism. It would drive back imperial powers like Britain and France, purge the Jews in a project simply referred to as the final solution, and one of its other stated goals was to put in place the upstart democracy and racially diverse United States. Adolf Hitler had had something that captured a lot of people's attention. Now, if you're curious about the exact details about how the Nazis rose into power, how they managed to take over the government, I will cover that separately in some course materials that are provided through the online learning management system that I have. Anyways, part of what makes the Nazis succeed where the rolling door of other political groups fail is the Nazis managed to get people back to work. They started getting people to build roads like the Autobahn. They started getting the German steel industry rebuilt. And they started rebuilding the economy and trying to move things forward and make people feel like things were working out. They were an action-oriented group, the Nazis were, whether it was violence in the streets or exerting their political power. Now, these were benefits that were seen by Germans who were considered racially pure, part of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan race that the Nazis believed existed. And under the Nazis, they saw hyperinflation lessen and quality of life improve. In fact, Adolf Hitler was even named Person of the Year by Time magazine in 1938. For the rest, however, Nazi Germany was a nightmare for them. Nazi Germany was hostile, violent, genocidal. We will learn more about these in the future of this unit. Mein Kampf was very clear that there was no place in this world for people who did not fit into the fascist society. Nazi culture and the future of Nazi German Reich. Further, Hitler claimed that this would last 1,000 years. And so for many non-Germans, Jews, and other groups, this will be a very dark time. Now, I'm going to stop there because we've covered quite a bit of ground. And next time we'll expand on the exact details of how fascism set the foundation for and ultimately started World War II. In any case, I guess until later.